Hello, my name is Gabriel Fairman, and today I'm going to be talking about how to take your translation income to a whole other level with augmented translations. And in order to do so, let's first begin by defining what augmented translations mean. It's a quite unique term that's pretty new in the industry. So when we talk about augmented translations, we're referring to all the sets of processes that are in place to enhance the human experience while translating through cutting-edge technology, right? And think about, the analogy would be with robotic-assisted surgery, for instance. If you're performing a surgery with robotic-assisted devices, for instance, that may include, for instance, laser scalpels, that may include digital magnifying lens, that may include 5G devices that guide and assist, providing feedback in real time regarding how the surgery is going. So you're having all these augmentations in regards to your own cognitive capabilities. So the augmentation enhances your ability to both go faster, become more precise by layering on machinery in the form of technology to your own cognitive processes. So I think now we've established what augmented translations are, but let's talk about more specific examples of how this works. So when we talk about, in our case, about context-sensitive translate, for instance, that's an example of an augmented translation experience. What is context-sensitive translate, for instance? The context-sensitive translation is the ability that we have to produce a highly plausible and contextualized translation feed that takes into account multiple sources, such as your translation memories, your glossaries, and machine translations engines that you have plugged into your translation process to provide you something that makes a lot of sense from a literary perspective. And most importantly, the context-sensitive translation is iterative in the sense that with each and every change that you make, it gets more aligned to your own tastes, preferences, style, diction, tone. So when we talk about augmented translations, we're talking about enhancing your capability of going faster and enhancing your capability of being more precise. Now, if you're faster and more precise, that means you can deliver more words during a day with better quality. And as most translators are either billing per word or per hour, but there's some mensuration of productivity in place. If you're able to deliver more, you'll make more. So the connection around augmented translation and income is around the ability to deliver more content better. And before we go further into these different kinds of augmented actions, let me just pause for a second and differentiate this from machine translation post-editing. So as translators, I think most of us, and I myself am a translator, my mother was a translator, I would say technology has had a dehumanizing effect in the integrity of the authorship process. At least that's always been the case for me. So for instance, when I work translating on a document, for instance, entirely on my own, typing it out, I feel full artistic and authorial freedom. When I work within the constraints, for instance, of a CAT tool, there are a lot more things keeping me in check because I'm being provided with fuzzy matches, because I'm being provided with perfect matches, because I have to follow a certain glossary, because I have to follow certain rules. So those rules, they're anchoring a certain linguistic corpus in place, but at the same time, they are impeding my feeling of authorship. With machine translation post-editing, in my opinion, that gets exacerbated because now instead of me typing out things, I'm getting a whole pre-translated documents over which I'm working now. And that pre-translation, it's static, it's cold, it's been done based on some engine that works from a syntactical perspective. That is, even the neural engines, they're still working in a syntactical paradigm. They're understanding structures of language as numbers, as statistics, as rules, as things that may make sense from a numerical predictability perspective, but not necessarily from a semantic perspective. When you think about semantics, we're thinking about meaning, right? So syntax is, let's say, for instance, the word dog. Semantics is the fact that the dog means this mammal that barks, right? It's the bigger understanding of what words are alluding to and how they're interconnected in a more abstract way. But going back to the idea of machine translation post-editing, when I work with machine translation post-editing, I feel like my sense of authorship goes down the drain. I'm essentially going to be probably, even if I do attain some degree of higher productivity, that higher productivity is going to come at a huge emotional and mental cost for me. I'm going to be reviewing some feeds that are going to be really good, some feeds that are going to be just awful. There are going to be hidden mistakes in the text that I have to look for. And instead of feeling like an author, I feel like a linguistic janitor when I do machine translation post-editing. I really don't appreciate it. And again, nothing against being a janitor. It's a noble position in and of itself, but when I work with translation, I want to feel like an author, and that is a basic guiding principle for me. Now, when we went into augmented translation, what we realized was that the ability to preserve the sense of authorship was not just a possibility, but it also became enhanced. Because when I work dialogically with an engine that's providing me with feeds that are reacting to my changes in runtime, that is, it's learning and adjusting to each and every change that I'm making, it's able to create semantic inferences based on my changes, my feeling as an author becomes enhanced. I'm getting things that make sense, they resonate with me, and as I make more changes, they begin to resonate more. My productivity becomes higher, and the context-sensitive translate in the augmented translation realm, that's our accelerator. That's what makes you go faster as the feeds become more and more aligned with your natural way of expressing yourself. Now, we also have a break in this process, which would be our semantic verifier, BWX translation smells. So what a semantic verifier does is it audits in runtime. As I translate, it audits the choices that I'm making, and it flags potential problems in these choices. And what's interesting about translation smells is the variety of problems that it can flag. It can flag very simple things, for instance, a spelling mistake, something that has been added to the translation, omitted from the translation. It can pick up on things such as subject-verb agreements. It can pick up on mistranslations. It can pick up on awkwardness, wordiness, cultural misappropriation, gender bias. The list goes on, and the beauty of it is I don't necessarily have to agree with it. And what's even more interesting is that the semantic smells detection is capable of disagreeing with its own suggestions by design. That means that you have an added layer of critical discernment in addition to my own. So the semantic verification, it works like brake pedals, questioning me, yeah, I know you said this, but does this really make sense? Is this really how you want to express this? Is this not being too informal or too formal given the context? And as I confirm my sentences, I'm further teaching the engine that's working to my own benefit and for my own benefit, in my own data and with my own data only. I'm teaching this engine to be more like me. And as it becomes more like me, as it mirrors, even from a pure emulation perspective, right? There's no cognitive background over here. As it's able to emulate my own linguistic choices, I become to feel more comfortable and more fluid with it, which makes me go faster. As I realize that the semantic smells are working as guardrails for my choices, I go even faster because those silly mistakes that I used to make, certain letters that I dropped, or they're another really good example, right? There's certain words that are spelled correctly, but they don't make sense in that given context, even though the spelling is right. So it won't be caught by the spell detection, but semantic smells contextual verification will probably pick up on that. One thing I want to emphasize is that the absence of smells isn't the guarantee that you're going to have perfection in your translation, but the presence of smells is highly indicative that something may be off. So it's this huge aid. And it has also all kinds of mental health benefits as well, because through smells, I'm able to relax more. I know that I can focus more on the overall meaning of my text, on whether I'm happy from a linguistic perspective, whether the tone, the diction, the style is really in line with my brand, with my audience, with this particular context, and less on the lower level linguistic grunt work. Same thing with the context-sensitive translate regarding fuzzy matches. Instead of having to compare, let's say, a source with whatever has been stored in the TM and transporting those differences into essentially upgrading a fuzzy match into a perfect match manually, that upgrade process has been done by the context-sensitive translate. So whatever I'm presented with is, at least from a syntactical perspective, a highly plausible translation. And I, as the author, I have the final say. I can decide exactly how I want something to sound. And when you put this all together, you're talking about not just producing a little bit faster, you're talking about producing 2 times, 3 times as fast. And this is contingent on context and methodology. So these are 2 very important things for us to cover, right? In sentences that are more predictable, that recur more often, and this is very important to point out, this has nothing to do with the technicality of them. So something can be highly technical but still highly predictable. Context-sensitive translate is going to work amazingly. If the more you get into sentences that are pure copywriting flow, you're still going to have benefits with context-sensitive translate. They just won't be as high. It's analogous to machine translation, but much more refined, much more sophisticated, and much more capable with dealing with nuances that are so commonplace in language. Now, when you talk about the other key component is my own attitude towards text. If I'm able to work with the idea that some things may not be said exactly how I would phrase them, but they're good, I'm likely to be a lot more productive than if I, for instance, get a feed, but decide to change it completely because it's not exactly how I would say it. And the other thing is the discernment level, right? If I make changes that are the key changes, maybe I'll make very few changes, but very important changes. I'll change, for instance, the tone from formal to informal or vice versa. And if I do that right at the beginning of the text, every single suggestion thereafter is going to begin to conform itself to that basic primordial choice. So the more I focus on the fundamentals of language and the less I focus on just cosmetic changes here and there, the more productive I'm likely to be with this engine. Now, there are a lot of others augmented translation actions that we have in place. For instance, tag fixing, for instance, BWX learning terms, which self-extracts terminology and self-aligns terminology from your own translation process, proofreading, alternative suggestions, all of these added cognitive layers that make you a lot more productive and a lot more capable. Now, the key thing to keep in mind is that these are just tools. At the end of the day, you as the translator, you're still at center stage. You're still the owner of the content that you produce. You're still committing every single segment to your translation memories, and you're the one who's delivering it. So in my opinion, we see this as a highly empowering technology, not a disempowering one. And what's super important is the seamlessness of this, right? If you take a look at our editor and how deeply this is integrated into your experience, it doesn't feel like you're interacting with a large language model. It doesn't feel like you're interacting with all these different mechanisms that I'm describing. This is just happening. And the more used to it you get, the more in a flow state it becomes. Now, let's just briefly talk about the mechanisms behind this, right? So you have translation memories and glossaries that are the repositories of your context. All the training you do, it gets stored there. You're not training any GPT model anywhere. You're not training any machine translation model. You're not sharing your data with anybody. Your training is exclusively stored in the TMs and the TBs that you set up within BWX. Very important. If you choose to turn on augmented actions, what happens is that BWX interacts in the background with GPT models hosted by OpenAI and Microsoft Azure. You do have the possibility of integrating directly to your own instance of GPT, but since these models of GPT that we interact with are stateless, meaning that they're not storing information by design, it really won't make a difference unless you decide to build a custom model with your own custom training, which does have additional fees, but GPT by design, the models that we interact with, they're stateless by design. And that's super important to keep in mind. And both Microsoft and OpenAI both provide very clear assurances as far as data privacy goes. So they ensure that the data, it gets stored for 30 days, encrypted at rest for abuse monitoring purposes only, but that the data is not used to train any other models. And they do that in writing. I highly recommend you read through their data privacy guidelines because, again, super important. But what we take into account in VWX is that you can turn on augmented actions, for instance, for your account as a whole, but you can turn it off or on for your given client selectively. So you can have permission to work from a given client with augmented translations, turn that on, with another client, turn that off. So it's a very flexible process. Now, again, let's connect this back to income, right? Think about, let's say you're charging 20 cents a word as an example. And if you typically deliver 2,000 words a day, that means you're going to make $400 on that given day. Now, if you're translating, if you're still charging 20 cents, but you're now delivering 4,000 words a day, now you're making $800 a day. And the key thing to keep in mind over here is that, and again, I'm just throwing numbers out here, the key thing to keep in mind is that because you're producing more, you also have the opportunity to become more competitive, which means, let's say, for instance, you could lower your rate from 20 cents to, let's say, 18 cents. That would mean a 10% decrease, and you would still be making significantly more than you would in your previous productivity structure. So what's most important about the augmented translations is that not only can you make more money now, but you can set yourself up in a path where you'll be essentially future-proofed. Because as the technology continues to get better, for instance, let's say the day after tomorrow GPT-5 is released, GPT-5 will plug into our text seamlessly, which is what's going to happen is that the results that you'll get will be even more highly contextualized, will make even more sense. We'll be able to make even more semantic inferences, which means you'll be even more productive, and you'll already be in that paradigm. So because you're already in that paradigm, the chances that you're going to continue to be highly productive and relevant for your clients increases very significantly. On the other hand, if you're not working within this paradigm, your exposure to risk of change, of becoming irrelevant or obsolete, in my opinion, increases very significantly because all of a sudden, people around you are going to be producing 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 words a day consistently, and it'll be very hard for you to keep up. Or other people are going to be producing things with a lot higher quality than you do, and it'll be very hard to keep up. And the thing about this game is that the first mover always has the advantage. If you're the one who's, let's say, leading this, and you're the one who's, let's say, proposing a discount to your end client or your translation agency, you stand to benefit the most out of it. If you're waiting for something to happen, if you're waiting for a certain client to say, you know what, I really like your work, but I have to pay you less if you'd like to work with me, that means they already have a viable alternative on the other end, and you're cornered. You don't have a way out of it. And I do want to point out that it will take a while to get used to this way of working, even though it's a lot more productive. And even though it unlocks a lot more possibility of income, it does require a transformation of how you encounter your presence as an author regarding translations. So the earlier you get on that journey, the earlier you get on that train, the sooner you'll get to that destination. And the sooner you get there, the more you're able to adapt continuously and evolve within that paradigm. So the beauty of augmented translations is that not only does it increase your income now, but it places you on a path where you can continuously increase your income moving forward. Thank you very much for watching this video. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Take care.